NYC Workforce Drop. I'm Greg Morris, the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Thank you all for joining us. You know, the season is winding down. We are really coming to the conclusion of season 1 of the Workforce Drop. So I just want to express my gratitude and appreciation for you having listened in this journey with us. The journey taking place at the Manhattan Neighborhood Network Studio on West 38th. We have had some fantastic guests. I'm grateful to every single one for sitting across from me and letting us do this and storytell. And sometimes it's been directly focused on workforce development. Sometimes we've connected to the economics and how the city works and where the city's headed. And sometimes we just sort of unpacked a little bit about who we are in this space at this particular time. And today, I'm really excited about your willingness to join us for a conversation about, we'll call it anti-poverty work. We'll focus it and frame it around the idea of the difference we can make in people's lives if we focus on hope, money, and love. I am thrilled that Anthony Barrows is with us. He is the executive director of Lift New York. You might remember him from our conference in December. He moderated the coalitions panel. He knocked the place out with a 90-second opener that really was focused on the idea of having some sense of knowing what works, how it is that we think about who is getting what done and how it needs to get done to make people's lives better. His journey on behavioral design and social justice is remarkable. He was a managing director at Ideas 42, a career in the arts to start that led him down this remarkable path. During the course of our time together, he's going to talk a little bit about his personal journey, his professional journey, where Lift New York is headed, what it has accomplished, and where it's going. And I have to also acknowledge in this particular moment that the Lyft CEO is Michelle Roan Collins, and we give a shout out to her. I was lucky enough in my career to have worked with Michelle back in my days at University Settlement and The Door, and there is literally no brighter light imaginable. And she's the one who said to me when she agreed to be at our conference and she agreed to speak, and I was so grateful and I was thrilled to see her. She said, "You better have Anthony be part of this conference. People need to hear him." So if Michelle says that, you know that's real talk. Welcome, everyone, to the NYC Workforce Drop. This is Anthony Barrows. Anthony, welcome. It's great to have you here. But I got to be honest with you. You walked in here with your Celtics hat on.
I did.
And
I wear it everywhere, Greg.
Here we go. It's a gutsy move.
You know, I've lived in New York for 13 years, and not a day has passed without me wearing a Red Sox, Patriots, Celtics, or Bruins piece of attire, and nobody ever gives me too much hassle for it. So, yeah, I've survived.
We embrace. We embrace. Now, I will, of that set of teams, first of all, I love a good game. You know what I mean? Like, I as a kid, though, I was a huge Laker fan. So, the Lakers Celtics, that's where I grew up in that space.
Indeed. What a rivalry.
What a rivalry. I didn't understand how amazing the Celtics team was. I just had to not like them. And I've learned over time looking back at how amazing those squads were when I was growing up.
What an embarrassment of riches we had back in the 80s.
Insane.
You know?
It was insane. And to me, basketball is different now because I feel like, and again, I root for the health and safety of all players, Knicks and otherwise. But the game moved faster. Didn't it? I mean, I don't know why. I watch now, I feel like there's a foul on every play.
Yeah, the flopping, SGA and others have made a career out of it. It's wild. I couldn't tell you why, other than it leads to scoring. So,
and that's true. Last note on the, you're a Boston kid, yeah?
Indeed, born and raised. So the farthest away from Boston I ever lived until I was 25 and moved to California for grad school was Cambridge, which is like saying the farthest away I lived from Brooklyn is Queens. So very Bostonian. Yeah.
And do you miss it?
Daily and intensely, yes.
What about it?
So Boston is the kind of place that is rooted in community, and despite its puritanical roots, there's benefits to that. So there's still a noblesse oblige that comes from the place having been run by old money and blue bloods. And what I always say is, if you look at a place like New York City or Oakland, where I've also lived, and you go to the quote-unquote bad neighborhoods, like things are tough, like resources are scarce, institutions are bare bones. But if you go to a Boston neighborhood, whatever you think of a bad neighborhood as being, there's parks, there's grocery stores, there's libraries. The public investment that comes from a kind of place like Boston, I think, is it's incredible, and it leads to good outcomes in my book. But also, home is home. Wherever it is that you grew up, you're always going to have a soft spot for. So I just miss my home and all the people that are there that I still love.
Yeah. I grew up in upstate New York. Always have the affinity for Schenectady, where I grew up. The whole different world that was then and now, and how it's evolved. And of course, home is always home, regardless. Speaking of Boston, one last note on Boston. I can't not say it because I've insisted for a long time that I am the biggest Boston Bruins fan in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
Now, I don't know if that's true, but I've acted as if, because I'm a Boston Bruins fanatic. So
I may have supplanted you for the couple of years that I lived in.
I was going to say now it's put to the test. I actually wrote to the Bruins. They were looking for people to the people who skate during a game midway through. There's people throwing T-shirts out in the crowd.
Yes.
And I can't skate, but I wrote a letter to the Bruins and said I could do that job because what I don't do in ice skating, I make up for in enthusiasm.
I believe it. And I've seen you on stage, and the enthusiasm is palpable. I would gladly receive a T-shirt from a canner from you at TD Garden.
I would love that. Listen, I'm so glad you're here. I was thinking about, as I was sort of looking through the history and the detail and the background, and listening to some of different – there's a lot of content that you've been responsible for writing, producing, some video content as well in terms of your personal story and your specific connections both to anti-poverty work and economic justice work that I think are moving, powerful, fascinating, and also I don't know if this is a common thread for you, but I can also sense your optimism and your colossal frustration that we continue to struggle to be able to do better than this. So
well put.
I recognize it's odd to start like that, but I want to start there because I think during the course of this conversation, based on everything you have been exploring over the course of your life and career, you're unpacking what works and how it works. And actually, right before we started, we kind of said, how do we move to policy reform? How do we actually get to better consequence? How is it that we see the resources actually result in the change that we're seeking? So let me just start this way with you. What set you on this path that you have been on?
It's a very good question, and every superhero needs an origin story. So I don't know how super
every
I am,
villain as well.
Indeed.
Every villain as well.
So as you said, I'm a Bostonian and grew up in neighborhoods in Boston, in the projects, in what is, by U.S. standards, pretty deep poverty. So public housing, public schools, public hospitals, public assistance, like you name the program, and I was inside of it. From the time that I was even in utero, I was getting the benefits of the WIC program, went to Head Start, was on SNAP when it was still food stamps, when they were physical pieces of paper, that I was very embarrassed to go spend at the corner store on a gallon of milk. What I learned in those many years of being inside those systems is that when they work well, when they work as they are intended by the people who design them, they're really helpful. They can lever you up as a human being, give you opportunities you wouldn't otherwise have access to. But all too often, they don't work as intended, or they work as intended by people who came to throw a monkey wrench in them after their implementation. And so I've seen far too many people, neighbors that I grew up with, my own family members and friends, chewed up, ground into dust by these systems. And so my motivation in terms of all of the work that I've done, which has spanned many different careers and sectors, has always been to make sure that the systems that people rely on work as best as they possibly can so that our collective well-being is improved.
And just in this particular moment in time, do you feel like we have made progress? From as you look back on your career, as you look back on your life, are there ways that you can think about right now, just as a starting point? Do you feel optimistic? Do you feel like looking back, we have done something good here? And I bring that up simply because the data related to the true cost of living right now, and again, we had Aldrin Bonilla on the podcast recently to talk about that. We had Jennifer Jones-Austin from FPWA talking about that. There's 2 or 3 different sources right now of what the true cost of living is. No matter which way you look at it, the numbers are awful.
Indeed.
We did the pod with Christine Quinn talking about the number of homeless children in New York City. I guess it's hard not to start by saying, what can we feel good about?
Yeah, time marches ever forward, and that may be one of the only things that is linear about our experience in this world as human beings or as people that are playing in the social sector, because everything else kind of is a yo-yo or moving in an elliptical pattern. We see, thermostatic public sentiment about politics, and that leads to different people being in power and different social policy regimes coming and going. And so, of course, there's been progress, and there's been a lot of retrenchment and loss. So even in my life, so I'm turning 48 this year, and even in my life, I've seen lots of progress and lots of retrenchment. I think back to the year that I graduated from high school, which is 1996, and Bill Clinton represented the apotheosis of the anti-public sector sentiment, especially when it comes to public benefits, by passing PRORA, what he called welfare reform, ending welfare as we know it.
Yeah.
And that ushered in this era of TANF, where people have a 5-year lifetime limit on getting help for their basic needs for themselves and their kids in the form of cash. Now, I can't see that as anything other than a loss, an incredible loss to our well-being.
That's right.
And I think it depends on who you ask whether that represents progress or loss, but I think it's a big loss. Now, on the other hand, there's been lots of areas where we've seen improvement. So another one of the systems that I was involved in as a young person was a child welfare system, and I went into foster care when I was a teenager. And I think that we've seen incredible improvements in child welfare, which isn't to say that things are where they need to be. There's lots more that needs to change. But if you look at the number of young people that are being placed with kin if they have to be removed from their family, or that are able to stay with their caregivers of origin instead of being removed at the first sign of risk, there's incredible improvement there. And plenty of work left to be done around racial inequities and the way people are treated and the outcomes that kids who end up in the system end up experiencing later in life. But I think it is a complicated picture is probably the best way to sum that up.
You wrote a piece in 2022, behavioral scientist, I think is the particular name of the journal.
Yep.
Lived experience makes the work better. And it opens with you talking about your mother grumbling. Growing up, my mother sometimes had to drag me to appointments with social service agencies. After the meetings, I remember she'd exasperatedly ask things like, if they want us off welfare, why aren't we allowed to save more than $1,000? It was a fair question. How could we get off public benefits without being able to save for tuition, a reliable car, a rainy day, or much of anything else? You talk a lot about personal experience and how that impacts both, I think, your thinking and how it is that it should influence our thinking about poverty, about how it is that we are thinking about the solutions and the values and the impact. We talked before the podcast started about how fortunate we can be in our lives and in our experiences. Tell me about your work right now and how it is that you are thinking about how to help people be able to, I don't want to just say save here. I want to talk about this from the idea of how is it that we get to a place where we're not just surviving, but we're thriving. Tell us a little bit about your work today. And I believe Hope, Money, and Love is and you were at our conference, and thank you for that, for moderating. You were wonderful. I was in the back of the room when the words "hope, money, and love" came up.
Yes.
By the national CEO of your shop, Michelle Roan Collins, who I can't believe in my lifetime I got to work with Michelle. It was the
You and
gift
me
of all
both.
gifts, like insane. But I'll just say, when hope, money, and love came up, I was standing in the back of the room, and I saw the crowd literally just lean forward, and the people working the deck next to me with all the levels and the sound were just like, right. Talk to me about the work that you're doing now.
Absolutely. So I am the executive director of Lyft New York. We're the New York-based branch of Lyft, the national organization run by my esteemed colleague, Michelle Roan Collins. What we do is anti-poverty work. And that anti-poverty work has a few premises that are built into it. One of the first ones that's important to know is that we're a two-gen organization. That means different things to different organizations. But for us, it means that you've got to invest in a whole family if you want good outcomes for the children in that family. So we're parent-focused. What we do with parents of kids, they have to have at least one kid under 8. So what we do with those parents is economic mobility-focused coaching. That's the core of our direct service work. So there's lots of organizations that do different kinds of anti-poverty work. Our coaching model really starts by asking families what their greatest ambitions are, what their biggest hopes and dreams are for themselves and their kids. And then based on that, they work with our coaches on a monthly basis for about 2 years to articulate a path from where they are to where they want to be, and then start pursuing those goals, which sometimes includes changing up the path that you're on because life happens. But it's rooted in this second premise, which is that people are experts on their own lives, and that parents, to a person, love their kids and want the best for them. And if we can give them the resources and the connections that they need, they're going to do better and their kids are going to do better. And there's good research out there that talks about the return on investment in early childhood. And we really believe that if you're going to invest in kids, if you're going to invest in early childhood, you can't forget the parents because they're home base. They're exactly who's going to be making decisions and making choices and creating the environment that kids need. So if you poured all of your resources into the kid and nothing into the parents, your program's bound to fail. And so, that brings us to Hope, Money, and Love, one of our mottos. So let's kind of dig into each of those. What is hope about? Hope means that you have to believe in a future, in a different future being possible for yourself and your kids. And in previous work, I would talk a lot about belief barriers. And I would think back to the days that I was living in the projects as a little kid. And if you told me that I would have a couple graduate degrees and make a good living, I would have laughed at you because it seemed impossible because I didn't see anyone else that was in my community doing it. It would be like if I told you, let's go up to the roof so that you can fly across the Hudson River over to New Jersey. All you have to do is just spread your arms and fly. You would reasonably tell me that I was insane because you know that to be impossible because you've never seen a human being do it. And yet, this is the kind of thing that we ask people to do all the time, to do things that are patently impossible based on the information that they've got from the lives that they've lived in the communities where they reside. So we've got to give people hope. We've got to make that thing that they may aspire to seem actually possible in order to make it reasonable for them to act on those aspirations. Now, having hope isn't enough. To actualize hope, you also need money and love. So one of the things that we do with our coaching program is actually to provide a modest but meaningful cash transfer. So once a quarter, it's $150, $600 a year for people that are actively engaged with our program. And that's not the size of a universal basic income program, but it's enough. And for our families who make on average about $19,000 a year here in New York City, which anyone who knows anything about the cost of living in New York City knows doesn't go too far, that can be the difference between having the lights on or not, or having food on the table or not, or being able to throw your kid a birthday party or not. And no restrictions on that money. We trust them to do what they need with that. And as part of our coaching, we talk about economic mobility and about savings and credit scores and income. So that's one way to actualize your hope, is to be thoughtful about and get control over the money flows in your life. But none of that really matters if you're not embedded in community, if you're not surrounded by people who care about you and your well-being and the well-being of your kids, who are going to root for you, who are going to write you a letter of recommendation, who are going to bring you a hot plate of food if you've had a loss, who are going to come and root for your kid at their baseball game. People need love, which means that they need each other. They need community. And so that's a big component of what we build. It's harder to quantify, but it's key to what we do.
Let's break those down part by part a little bit further. What stifles hope? When you talk to parents, when you're engaged with families, is there something they say that is getting in the way of that?
Unfortunately, these days, there's many things that get in the way of hope. So if we can start with those programs that we opened the show talking about, I'd say that's one source of frustration and maybe hopelessness, that I'm looking for a place to live and maybe I have a Section 8 voucher, but I can't find anybody that'll take it. Or I can find people that'll take it, but it's nowhere near where my kid goes to school or where I need to go to work. Or it's not in a neighborhood where I feel safe walking home from the subway at night. Think about people's access to health care and food support programs. The administration that's in Washington right now is making it harder for us to get access to those things on a daily basis, imposing things like work requirements. I wrote another paper about that. If people want to read it, it's called Work Requirements Don't Work. And, you know, that's a cheeky joke, but like work requirements actually do work for the people that have designed them by doing the thing that they want, which is to kick people off of the programs, not to ensure that they're making a living wage.
That's the intention.
Indeed.
That's the intention.
So there's a lot of hopelessness that comes from systems that putatively are there to support people in their pursuit of a healthy and happy life, actually being designed or implemented in a way that prevents them from getting access to the things that they need. Now, layer that on top of the pervasive political environment that we're in, where we see masked men violently snatching people off the streets or killing them in the street. And think about the communities that we work with in the South Bronx and northern Manhattan. All of our families identify as people of color. Many of them are immigrants, and they live in a daily state of terror. So in a world, in a country where we are sold stories about the American dream, anybody who just works hard enough, who's a striver, who's willing to, you know, use their elbow grease can get ahead. And you see people who are out there working 2 or 3 jobs to scrape by and are at threat of being, you know, grabbed off of the street into an unmarked van, maybe to disappear to Louisiana and maybe never come back, another source of hopelessness. And so it's really up to us to think about how we can counteract some of those forces. And it's got to start immediate. It's got to start small. It's got to start local. It starts with the relationships that you can build with other people and the love that you can give to each other. Simply by being present and sharing the resources and the care that you have for each other. And
that part, to hopscotch over money for a second, to think about love, which I think the older we get, the more interesting the conversations about what love means and what the value add is, and looking back in your life, how it was something that you acted on or didn't act on. I'm going to suggest, and you can tell me if this is in alignment or not, but sometimes the act of love is making sure that people know they're not alone.
Indeed.
And that's about community, right? I mean, that's about when I'm, to your point, when I'm in a moment of needing support, when I want a moment to share something successful that's happened. I want to champion something. I want to have that moment with someone else. And in a city like this, which with so many people, it's fascinating to me how alone you can still feel.
That's
even
right.
if you're literally surrounded by bodies everywhere you look in some cases. That may or may not look like you, may or not share your interests, but there's everywhere I look, and yet I could still feel completely isolated.
And in some ways, it's worse when you're swimming in a sea of other humans, but feeling profoundly isolated. That old sociological concept of anomie, that kind of disconnection. It is crucial, as you say, to be loved, to offer love, to think of love as an act, a thing that you do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we try to show all of our members. We bring people into our offices and have events that are only there for us to share the resources that we've got. So we've got a Mother's Day event coming up where we're going to be sharing care packages that we've gotten some of our corporate partners and funders to put together for the moms that are among our membership. And just to break bread with each other, not to speechify, not to do any like recording so that we can send out a fundraising appeal on the backs of like the moms and the kids, but to build community, to build those relationships with each other. And it really is just about showing up and about being present. And, you know, if you've ever done any community organizing, you know that interpersonal relationship is the basis for power building. Because if we don't trust each other, we're not going to do hard work with each other. We're not going to take risks with each other.
You're not going to feel vulnerable with each other.
Indeed. And without being able to take those risks or act collectively, we don't get anything done.
You know, you talked about the two-generation focus, parents and children. And I'm curious, do you see or have you thought about or is there some reflection on the three-generation conversation? And I say that because I feel like in this city, without having any data in front of me to back this up, that families are having to care for families in some unique and interesting ways. And you could probably rewind the clock to say it's always been like that. But it seems magnified now, partially because of the cost of living has spiked and we're in a true affordability crisis. Is that something you see in your conversations or something you're talking about as well, that sort of three-generation narrative?
Absolutely. And, you know, 2Gen, I think, was a coinage popularized by Ascend at the Aspen Institute, where I was a fellow in 2018.
You're wearing this a sweater right now.
I advertise for them all the time. And, you know, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it's not just about two generations, parents and kids. That kind of atomized idea about the family is not really what the 2Gen movement is about. It's about helping us understand families as collectives and needing to think not just about a parent, not just about a child, not just about a grandparent, a sibling, an aunt, an uncle, chosen family members, fictive kin, but to think of that group as a system that needs to be thought about and cared for and served as a group, as a collective. Because, again, you're going to fail if you're trying to do something for one node in that system without thinking about the way that it affects the rest of the nodes. So we definitely see at Lift New York people relying at least as much now, if not more, on those extended systems of care, on those extended networks of familial ties, whether they're biological or not, just in order to survive. No one can do it alone, but especially in these moments of crisis, being able to grab onto somebody's shoulder becomes even more important.
I was watching a YouTube clip. It may have been related. It might have been maybe at that moment you're at Ideas 42. I'm not sure where you are in the trajectory of your career, but it's a YouTube clip. You're talking to an audience, and you're talking about your 19-year-old self. I'm 19-year-old sitting in a metal and vinyl office chair, and my hands have a death grip on the arms, and I'm feeling an intense sense of anger and unfairness because I'm being told that the help I've been getting from the state foster care agency is coming to an end. We're talking about hope. We're talking about money. We're talking about love. I suspect in that particular moment, you are in a moment of panic and crisis and anger and frustration, and I'm guessing it feels both hopeless, financially, you're stuck, right? And I have to imagine that was a sense of not feeling loved. Can you talk a little bit about that particular time? And what was fascinating to me, you are an extraordinarily skilled storyteller because what this video does is, as you talk about it, you talk about how it is in this circumstance that haven't we all been in moments where we are feeling an absence of hope, money is a concern, a question, a crisis, and the absence of love? Haven't we all been there? What if I only judged you on your worst moment? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. That story was a crucial moment for me. So as I mentioned earlier, I was in foster care. I went into foster care in Massachusetts as a teenager. And again, because the systems in Massachusetts and in Boston are pretty robust, still were robust then, I got a lot of support. I had a lot of mentorship, a lot of guidance, got a lot of second, third, and 15th chances when I made bad choices as an angry teenager who was doing all kinds of dumb things.
As teenagers will do.
As my teenager is doing now. And because of that, managed to graduate from high school, get into college, have that college experience paid for, and was doing well at this moment in the story that I was telling. So, 19, going on 20, living in my own apartment, on the dean's list, doing all the things that I knew I was supposed to do, following the quote-unquote rules of the game, right? And because of that, ironically, the area office, the Park Street area office in the Fields Corner neighborhood of Dorchester, was telling me that it was time for me to go off and be on my own. You're doing so well. This is a sign to us that you are succeeding and therefore do not any longer need our help. And what that would have meant to me was I was going to lose unconditional cash that I was getting at the time to the tune of maybe $300 or $400 a month, which was helping me pay my rent. I would lose my health insurance. And importantly, psychologically, emotionally, I would lose this backstop that I had of people that were in my corner that would come check on me once a month and make sure everything was okay, that I could turn to if I got into a pickle to get some help, to get some advice, to pull a string, to tap a connection on the shoulder to make things better for me. And what it felt like, even though this is not what they were saying explicitly, was an expulsion. What it felt like was an abandonment, which I had already experienced enough of in my life. And so that's what that moment was describing.
And how is it that you work your way past that moment? Because as someone who has a history working with young adults, folks in New York City with a number of different vulnerabilities and also the most tremendous resilience imaginable, there are moments when you can see someone's world spinning off its axis. What got you from that place of I'm gripping onto the vinyl metal chair thinking that everything that has kept me afloat is now being stripped away?
Caring adults in my life refusing to let me walk off into the sunset and give it all up. And I think, again, just as we've all been in those places of crisis, we've also all probably had those moments where the people around us that cared about us and cared for us were able to reel us back from the edge of some abyss. So, if I had truly been on my own, which is what it felt like to me in that moment, I probably would have just let this thing happen and likely would have had to go find too much work to do to pay my rent, which wouldn't have allowed me to succeed in school, may have ended up dropping out altogether, probably wouldn't have had the life trajectory that I've had ever since. But because I was surrounded by people, by community, surrounded by love in the Hope, Money, and Love motto, I had other people in different parts of that agency, the Department of Social Services, go to bat for me and tell the people in the area office, look, this isn't happening. He's doing everything he needs to do. In a moment like that, you push in more resources to keep people afloat.
That's right.
You don't take away the life preserver or the oars.
That's right.
You throw another person there, give them a motor so that they can go farther, right?
That's right.
And so that's how it resolved, was by me being able to lean on the people who were already in my corner to help me navigate that situation. And luckily, I was a youth advocate at the time, so I was on the youth advisory board for the Commonwealth's Department of Social Services, and I wasn't the only one that this was happening to. I wasn't the only young person who was doing everything that they needed to do in school and being asked to leave, because there's a draw of resources on the agency and on the people's time who were tasked to supervise us, and some agency offices were saying, let's get rid of these older kids, but because I had access to the commissioner, and because I knew other kids were going through this, we were able to band together and sit with the commissioner and say, look, what you're doing isn't about us thriving. It's about saving some nickels and dimes on the margins. And they were able to issue some policy guidance that said, if you want to get rid of kids who've signed themselves in voluntarily and are doing everything that they need to do to comply with their service plan, you have to escalate it all the way to the top and get permission to do it instead of leaving it at the discretion of area offices. And, this was an early lesson to me that change was possible within systems, even though they seemed so monolithic, like these behemoth things that were made of gears that I couldn't see. What I learned then was these systems are made of people. And if good people see bad things happening and they have the power to change it, they will.
I'd like to believe that that is always true. It takes a lot of effort from people who care and are invested and sometimes going through systems that are compromising, challenging, and overwhelming to push in those moments. I have to believe probably in your lifetime you thought you were fortunate to have had a circumstance that could have spun off to be able to recalibrate. And yet that shouldn't be about fortune. That should be about the dignity we have for individuals, right?
That's exactly right. And so the talk that I was giving that you were referencing is really about that point. We should have systems that don't rely on you being lucky like I was in that moment to be well known to the agency by people that had a lot of juice that could call people and tell them no. We should build systems that treat everyone with dignity, that presume that we all deserve the things that allow us to thrive, that don't make us earn them by behaving well or looking good or saying the right words or speaking the right language or knowing the right people. Our systems should be built so that everyone, even people who have a lot of bad days, even people who make a lot of bad choices, even people that nobody knows, have a guarantee that they've got the resources they need to thrive.
And that's the turn, by the way, I think, in that particular talk, because you talk about how you were imperfect, and we all go through imperfections.
Indeed.
And we can go through multiple ones.
And I wasn't imperfect just then. I'm still an imperfect guy.
Yeah.
Just ask my wife.
Totally I think what's interesting about that is that sense of, if I capture you on your worst day, does that mean that there should be a consequence for you? That you then don't deserve the dignity? And I think what's hard about that for people is we can get caught up because of our own challenges, how it is that we imagine ourselves and others, what our own vulnerabilities are, to get into this conversation about there should be a consequence for you if you fail. You don't deserve. Unfortunately, that has resulted in a lot of folks who need that motor to get turned on to get them past multiple crisis points. And I think in this city in particular, we see that over and over again. And it's not because there aren't good stories. It's not because there aren't the organizations like yours and others that aren't doing everything conceivably imaginable to try to figure out how to get people going. It's simply a matter of there's a lot of people in crisis. And there's a lot of people having bad days. And actually it turns out we all have bad days. How do we reconceptualize poverty becomes another sort of point that I think you have written about. This is part of your Ideas 42 work, Poverty Interrupted, Applying Behavioral Science to the Context of Chronic Scarcity. This is you. The first step, or this is from the team that put this together, you were part of this. The first step is to reconceptualize poverty itself as a particular context that, like any other, elicits a set of natural and predictable responses. Thus, the behaviors and decisions we may observe among people living with low incomes tell us much more about the condition of poverty itself than about the motives, skills, or character of the people experiencing it. The last note, emerging research has shown that living in poverty means living in chronic scarcity. And scarcity comes with a set of cognitive consequences that may be beneficial or adaptive in the short term, but highly, highly deleterious when experienced chronically. How do you think about that? And from the time that was put together for you, how far what is there anything to that statement right here that you would say, as I think about it now, here's how I would amend that, here's how I would add to that, or here's even more I've learned about that particular framing?
I stand by every word 11 years later.
I knew you would.
So a couple things to say, though, that are really important to contextualize this. So another motto that I live by is context matters. And this includes contexts that are socioeconomic in nature, which poverty is. And the science tells us that, as you can read about in the paper if you're interested, our cognition and therefore our behavior is affected when we live without enough of a key resource. So in the moment, it has these predictable effects of getting you to focus on the thing that you don't have enough of. Everyone has experienced this. So when you're hitting a deadline at work, you can like not hear the phone ringing or hear your emails dinging. You can really focus in on getting that report written. If you're up all night writing a term paper, everyone has experienced what's called the focus dividend that comes from scarcity. And that has really beneficial effects. If you're really hungry and you're out trying to hunt or gather food, you can focus in on that and ignore the like hunger pangs rumbling your stomach, or the bad weather that's coming that might be otherwise unpleasant. But what's also true is that if all you're ever doing is focusing on one emergency and then another, toggling from urgent thing to urgent thing, you can never look into the distance and see what's coming, either metaphorically or literally. And so people that live in poverty, which is to say chronic scarcity, never having enough of the key things that they need, are experiencing that kind of cognitive disorderedness that comes from having not enough of anything, which means that they're not able to think about the future and to make the kind of plans and choices that you need to get out of this scarce situation. Now, what's also true, again, sociopolitically, is that these are policy choices that we've made that allow poverty to exist. So if you go look at the econometric numbers around the U.S. economy or the global economy, what you'll find is that there are, in fact, enough resources lying around that no one has to live outside if they don't want to. No one has to go to bed hungry. No child has to be denied health care. I would even argue no adult needs to be denied health care. There's a lot of money sloshing around. And we have made the choice not to tax wealth ever, to reduce the marginal tax rate for high income earners, to tax carried interest differently than we tax wage income. And these are all choices that we've made that have led us to tolerate poverty and all of the effects that come from it. One might even argue that these are choices that require us to have people living in poverty in order for a select few to be very, very wealthy. And so if we're thinking again about systems and about change, we have to think about the values that underlie the choices that we make as we construct them. Are our values those of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that tell us that people have a right to have access to work and Social Security and education? Or are they values that say, if you made one mistake, you can never again live in public housing, get access to cash or food, or be guaranteed a place to live? If you happen to be unlucky enough not to be born rich, best of luck with the rest of your life. Hope you can make it over to this side of the pond, you know? And I think, you know, the answer to the question that I'm posing is that we don't have to live like that, but we choose to every day. And there are consequences to it in terms of people's well-being.
You know, it's been a common theme in this podcast. I say this in every episode, talking about the pandemic. I feel like we, in this podcast, we've talked sometimes about the gift and the curse of that. And I don't mean gift in any sense because there was so much loss and so much devastation. And you could argue we have not found our footing post that point. But this idea of if you make it past a really hard thing, then perhaps you've learned something. And that based on that learning, then maybe you're capable of navigating situations better in the future. In this conversation about scarcity, in this conversation about how it is that we navigate crisis, to your initial point about how my brain is set on in a certain way if my entire organization is around trying to meet my immediate need, we all actually lived through that. I think it's been very easy for many of us, too few of us, to reflect on what that felt like, how people existed in that state of crisis before that and after that, and how it is we don't want anyone to feel those things, or we should never want anyone to feel those things, or at least I think you would share the notion that no one should ever go through that, and yet some people go through that on a daily basis. And I guess I'm just wondering, lessons learned from the pandemic. Am I making the right correlation to, if we could draw on that experience in a new way, in a different way, in a meaningful way, could we get to a place where we say that's not something we ever want in our lives or we want people to experience?
Absolutely, yes. And so in some ways, as you suggest, it was a boon in an abstract, big picture sense to our social policy and our society at large for so many people to have simultaneously experienced that sense of uncertainty and danger. And also to see that we didn't have to live the way that we were living. We were sending out unconditional cash transfers to everyone in the country.
Exactly.
We were expanding the amount of unconditional cash that was going to people that had kids in the form of EITC and CTC, Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Tax Credit. That halved child poverty. So we literally learned that many people could work from home and that we could afford to give everyone a little bit of cash and to give families a little bit of extra cash, and that it had positive effects on their well-being without wrecking our economy or ruining the incentives to work or any of those things.
And certainly some people got even more wealthy during that time period.
Indeed. And so I was so hopeful in that moment of crisis because so many people who had never experienced that sense of risk, of uncertainty, of dread, were feeling it. And seeing how when the government works well and provides for its citizens' well-being without any prejudice, without any deservedness narratives getting in the way, good things can happen. But very quickly we seem to have collectively forgotten the benefits of those things, and all of those programs are now gone. But the data remains, and the evidence is that when we were doing those things, especially for the lives of children, things were better. Setting aside, time out of school, people's socioeconomic circumstances were improved, and there's knock-on health and other outcomes that were improved because of it, and we've just abandoned it.
I want to get into your policy recommendations for this administration, but before I do, I just want to make one additional quote from you. This goes back to your lived experience makes work better piece. Imagine the different kind of interventions you wrote we might design if our teams were more intimately familiar with the problems we are trying to solve. I think we'd all be better off. That would seem to connect to what we experienced during the pandemic. But also I feel like in your writing and your communication, you've talked, and in your team building and in your engagement over the course of your career, the desire to have people in the room who have experience matters to you.
That's right.
I suspect as well. That's as your life has unfolded. By the way, you talked earlier before we started the podcast about you were an art student. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
And somehow you found your way into this particular space.
Indeed.
So I'm curious as to what you think about this idea of, how do we get to a place where we're trying to solve the problems and folks who are familiar that are guiding that practice?
Another theme of both my career but also my work at Lyft is that we need to respect, to listen to and act on the lived expertise of people that are struggling with the issues that we're working on, that are navigating the systems that we're trying to influence. And so it was important when I was a kid in foster care for the Child Welfare Agency to listen to us and the things that we need. It is still important now for agencies like HRA here in New York City or ACS here in New York City to listen to people that are navigating those systems currently. And this is woven through the work that we do at Lyft. We are member-driven in terms of how we design and deliver our programming, and also in the new policy work that we're beginning. So I'll say two things there. On the programming side, one of the things that we learned during COVID, even though I wasn't there, we continue to practice a little bit of virtual coaching when people need it, because we learned that it could work when people couldn't leave their house safely. And now we're continuing it because people, again, are at risk of leaving the house, not because of a pandemic, but because of wide-scale state violence against immigrants. But these are things that we learned, and we listen to our members and do the things that they tell us that they need. And we're constantly adapting and growing and modifying the way that we operate on the basis of believing what we hear and acting on it from our members. And that extends to the systems change work that we're trying to do. So just last summer, we began some policy work at Lift New York, the aim of which is to get our members, people that have at least one kid under 8 that are struggling financially, to be able to articulate and then argue for the changes that they want to see in the public sector based on their lived experience. And so nobody needs me to walk into Albany or to City Hall and say, all these people over here need X. What we're trying to do is to get the people themselves to be their own best advocates. And so our priorities have emerged from a listening tour that our national policy team did with members throughout the 4 cities where we operate. And it's resulted in some asks that are common across those 4 cities, none of which is going to be any surprise. People need more cash in their pockets. Mm-hmm. They need their basic needs to be met. They need free or affordable childcare, housing, transportation, and food. And they need all of those services to be delivered excellently. They want to be treated with respect and with dignity. They want their autonomy respected. They want to have control over what they get. And they need low administrative burdens. They need good things to be easy to get, to not have so many hoops and red tape and forms and indecipherable processes to get access to those things.
Are you feeling encouraged that this administration, the Mamdani administration, it's focused on economic justice?
Super amped at the Mamdani administration and all of the stuff that they're talking about. And if you listen to his platform, it very closely resembles the policy platform that Lyft has released. And I don't think that there's any mystery as to why. Like, we didn't seed his campaign with any of our ideas. We didn't steal them from his. He did the same thing that we do. He went out and talked to the community, asked people what they need and how they want to get it. And so no surprise to me that we came up with many of the same ideas.
And at the conference, you hosted a segment of the conference related to coalitions. You said, this is what you said now, if it were just as easy as aligning with people who have power to make those things happen, a lot of these things that you talked about in relation to the Mamdani administration, economic justice, listening to people and what they want, these are things that could have been happened a long time ago. So it begs the question, how do we get what we need? How do we get what our families and communities need? So you have a policy agenda being constructed, put in motion, set in motion. You have an administration in place right now, super amped, to use your language, about how they think and what they're thinking about, coming from what it is that you have said, the voice of people. You've also highlighted that it's critical that people with lived experience are at the table. What's it going to take to enact the change that you are seeking?
So, if I had a certain answer to your question, we might have already achieved it yet. But I know some of the ingredients that need to be present. So, we need to work in coalition. Lyft is an amazing 25-year-old organization with national presence, but we can't do it alone. In the same way that the big think tanks can't do it alone, that the behemoth nonprofits can't do it alone, we need to link arms with other people that share a goal and figure out ways to turn up the temperature, turn up the salience, turn up the pressure on the people who are at the levers of power to do the things that we know are necessary. And that means there's lots of strategy that needs to go into that, making choices about which priorities come first and doing power mapping to figure out like who has the hand on the right lever and all of that. But what we're doing right now, because we're at the beginning of this journey, is getting our constituency ready to engage in that work. So we're preparing first by getting a subset of our members ready to articulate their needs, to tell their stories in a non-exploitative way, because that is crucial, that we don't do poverty porn, and that people have the power to tell their own story in the way that they want, because it's super persuasive to folks, and also finding ways to make these partnerships with organizations that are aligned and already working on this stuff. There's plenty of organizations already fighting these fights that we want to join in and bolster the efforts of.
How long have you been at Lyft NY now? You've been ED for how long?
A year and 3 months, yeah.
Anything in particular that you learned surprised you? Any surprises over this period?
Something that has been surprising so far is the challenge of fundraising in New York City for local efforts. So, I've been in New York for 13 years. Did a lot of fundraising here in New York, but usually from a national perspective. It's tough to shake coins loose from these local foundations. Yeah, I was not prepared for that.
Do you think that has anything to do with the fact of maybe the absence of familiarity with experience that some of our friends in philanthropy or resource spaces, I don't mean to make a judgment in that regard, but thinking out loud perhaps, not capable of representing or understanding what particular need is?
Absolutely, yes. So I think that we live in a complex moment where there's a lot of pressure because of the retreat of the federal government from a variety of funding streams, combined with kind of constraint at the private philanthropy level. While there is an exploding need in the grantee community, that means that there's like more need for fewer dollars. So like that's certainly part of it. But I think you put your finger on something really crucial, which is that the people that are making choices about where philanthropic money flows are typically not people who have had these same struggles that grantees are looking to meet, to ameliorate. And I wish that it were different. I think that one thing that we've seen over the past couple decades ascending a little bit is more of this so-called trust-based philanthropy, where we don't have to do all of these like shuck and jive moves with metrics and reports that never get used to get a $100,000 grant. Like that's good. And also, I think a little bit more democratization around where money goes and why would be helpful. If you were able to get communities that you're targeting to have a say in where the money is going and to whom, I think that would be a step in the right direction and a way to lift up the voice of lived experience.
This has been tremendous, and I know we could continue to talk. We're winding down. I just want to note that this pod will drop in May. Happy May to everyone who's listening in. And then in June is when we will see the consequence of the federal changes to SNAP and the addition of work requirements that are going to be targeted. And I think, as you pointed out during the course of this podcast, an intentional effort to strip back people's access. There is no data anywhere anyone has ever found to determine that that's actually a good strategy to help people or to be able to help people stabilize or find success. And also, this is not a case very often of fraud or abuse or anything under that category, although those are issues that every sector has to deal with. But I'm wondering whether or not are your folks that you're talking to thinking about that? How will your organization be focused on that? And how will you, and I look forward to working with you, I should say, more than anything else, on how we navigate that particular challenge, because it's going to be a combination of trying to address immediate needs as people reset and have to be responsive and find their footing, while we push back and say this is not the right choice in this particular moment in people's lives.
Yes, we are acutely tuned into it and have been since the moment that I stepped in across the doorstep of Lyft, because the federal government has been undergoing undulating change, radical change. And so we do our best to do two things. Thing number one is to stay abreast of what those changes are, who they're going to affect and how, so that we can share that information with our members and get them prepared, including figuring out how to marshal different resources to help plug some of the holes that are being left by those federal changes. And alongside that, thing number two that we do, and it varies from city to city, but we try to sign on whenever we can to exercise whatever influence we've got to try to stem that tide or to support things that are being done to make up the difference.
Anthony, I want to thank you for your time with us. I feel like this conversation has just begun. There's a lot more to talk about from here. But more than anything else, I'm wishing you and your family success. I know you're in it's the time of year where you're looking closely at colleges.
Indeed.
So I'm wishing much success to your son as you figure out the right path and the right spot for that career to take off from here. Anthony, thank you for this time.
Thank you for having me.
Lots more to come. Lots more to come. Thank you, everybody. I'm the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. I am grateful to be on the air with you right now. And I'm going to be honest with you. This is the week that New York City lost one of its nonprofit sector champions, Fred Shack from Urban Pathways. We learned this week that he passed away. And this podcast will drop a number of weeks removed. And all I want to do in this particular moment, a few weeks removed, is to say to everyone that the spirit of Fred, if you got to know Fred in any way, shape, or form, if you had ever interacted or spent time with him, you knew that he was focused, determined, insanely thoughtful. He wanted absolutely for New Yorkers to do better. He wanted the people who serve New Yorkers to do better. His drive to ensure that long-term homelessness is something that we as a city are using all of our tools to respond to address, to overcome. As he had said over and over, we know how to do this. If we just use our resources right, if we just follow what we know, we don't have to have folks living on the streets. If we make our societal commitment to doing right, people won't live on our streets. And I just want to say, a couple weeks removed from learning of his passing, I'm still carrying that memory around, and will continue to do so. True champion of the sector, Fred Shack. There'll be more to say about his work and his commitment, and I look forward to having time and space to celebrate him and his life through the podcast. But I just want to sort of bring us back to this moment to say, Fred said he'd always. The last time I saw Fred, he said he'd always be around, as his professional career was changing and he's leaving Urban Pathways. And I just remember him saying, "Oh no, I'll always be around." And I guess I just want to remind all of you that Fred is with us, and he's always going to be around. And if we keep that vision in our head, we keep that sense of who he was and what he believed with us, we'll know what to do. We'll find it. He showed us the way. Thank you, everyone.